Where's everyone from? If they want to drop in the chat. I figure most are in Omaha, but with virtual, you never know. Okay. Looks like a lot of Omaha, a lot of Denver, some Iowa. I'm going to have a problem with the Chiefs, Adam. I mean, the Ravens, they should beat them this week. Thanks, Matt. Hey, Charles. You know, to really heckle, I think there needs to be some sort of emojis or GIFs being sent during the presentation that would really throw people off their game. I'm going to get people probably fully transparent, probably start maybe like 16, 17 after, get people a minute or two to jump in, and the one-on-one networking, which if you haven't checked out, that's pretty cool, actually. I've kind of talked to a couple people with AIM on there. It's a lot easier than I thought it would be. Yep, I can answer some of that. We will cover some of that, actually, ironically enough. In a nutshell, that specifically, I think there's the conception of if we have one team, it is more of a process that can be, how should I phrase this? If we put one team together to handle everything, in my opinion, we're not doing DevOps the right way, but it's more so to either try it out or to say, okay, we're going to make an expert team, and that expert team is going to do this, and then they're going to support everyone. The shared services model, which is good or bad, depending upon your size of organization. Yep, that's a good point. That's a good point. And we will cover some of that, hopefully. If I don't do it right, you can reach out to me for more clarification. Got no problem with that. All right, 17 after, gave some people the benefit of the doubt. We'll go ahead and we'll get started here. I'm sure everyone's seen this slide at least once, twice, 3 times, right? Thank you to the sponsors again for making this happen. This is the last session of the day, so bear with me. I'd like to say I'm keeping you from the bar, but with virtual, you may have a beer already in your hand, so. All right, so the DevOps mindset. I'm going to start here and just kind of give a high-level abstract more of what this is to give people the opportunity if they want to jump off, join another session. That's the beauty of this being virtual, right? But the DevOps mindset, we're going to cover things at a high level. We're going to keep things kind of different practices that you can use either personally as a team or as an organization to kind of help grow and really strive with DevOps. We're not going to open up Visual Studio. We're not going to open up Azure DevOps. We're not going to pull up tools and anything like that. It's not going to be a technical one. If you want to jump off, I'm not going to be offended. If you need to reach out to folks and tell them to come on and join, by all means, go ahead. One thing, this goes completely opposite of what I planned, so we're going to go off script a little bit. Originally, I was going to say, hold all questions till the end, but the more as I'm going through some of these sessions, it's going to be more Q&A. I want people to be able to be involved. Otherwise, you're just watching me on a YouTube channel, and it's more interactive this way. SDLC is software development lifecycle. So sorry if that was a confusion. We were limited on the number of characters we could put in there. So thus SDLC was the abbreviation. All right. So first off, a little bit about me. My name is John Folberth. I am a senior DevOps consultant at OST. I am based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. However, I just moved last month, was in Omaha for more than a decade. So some of you may have known me from previous stops and also just members of Azure User Group, Power BI User Group. You can find me there on my website. You can go, and there, that also has contact information for LinkedIn, GitHub, blog, all that kind of stuff. I will leave this up at the end if you do need to get a hold of me. There too is my email address. The important part there is OST USA. There's more than one OST, if you can believe that. There's just some certifications in the DevOps space that might lead to some of the experience I have here. So that being said, the next one I'll cover up briefly is OST. It's probably a new company for most folks in Omaha. So there's also Denver and Iowa on there too. We're based out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. We do have offices in Detroit and Minneapolis. But essentially, this is our model. We're an IT consulting group, but we bridge that distance between insights, technology, and strategy in smart, meaningful ways that yield transformative results. In a nutshell, we do IT consulting. We help our customers, may that be in app development, managed services, may that be also graphic design even, and project management. So we do a large spectrum of things that we can help and provide value. So starting off, blank slide. What is DevOps? Full transparency too, I prepped this before the keynote today, and we're going to see this aligns better than I thought it could. I almost couldn't script it better, but you know, they mentioned in the keynote that DevOps is the union of people, processes, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to our end users as defined by Microsoft. And that's a pretty good definition. What I have here for the DevOps mindset, it's more than a single tool, person, or process, rather an ideological mentality. So things will line up and hopefully it'll complement a lot of things that you've seen or heard today. I will say here, just take a minute to realize what we mean by that. We're saying you can't go and buy a product and say, yep, we're doing DevOps. It doesn't work that way. I know there's a tool called Azure DevOps, and that's a separate conversation, but it's more than just that, and it's more than just a person. I think someone there mentioned that, well, we have a team. Well, it's more than a team, right? It starts and grows and needs to be an organizational mind shift to kind of think more DevOps-like, so DevOps can enable, as Microsoft says, right, to continuously deliver value to our end users. May that be in an Agile methodology, because that's another notion, right, that Agile and DevOps are on opposite ends of the spectrum. Really, they kind of complement each other, if you want my honest opinion. And then also, it's more than a process. So if you were doing processes, then we're saying we have checkbox and we have stages, and everyone has that process that they do just because it's the process. Well, if you do it because it's the process, it inherently loses meaning. That makes sense if you think about it, right? Time and time again, I'm just checking the box and I lose why I'm checking the box. But if you have the mentality, then you understand why and you're constantly improving your discipline. So I'm going to call out here some characteristics, and we're going to go ahead and we'll stop and we'll do in-depth on each one of these a little bit. This is by no means an all-inclusive list, but we'll go through each of these individual components and how they can kind of enable and kind of promote that DevOps mentality or that DevOps within your organization. So first up we'll go on is automation. So automation, really, to do things automated, it means you must have the minimal input necessary, or min. Kind of ironically, that was the abbreviation that came up, but it's true. So I've got here an example, a couple Azure products, and you can see they're all named very similarly. They're all very consistent. To get this built up, the only thing I passed into a template was dev, the environment, because If we start thinking of things and how to automate, the destinations might be a little different. So how do we automate our same structure to be pointed at different destinations? I know there's been some talk with certain things like Kubernetes or containers. It's same philosophical, take the technology out of it, but the same philosophical thing we're trying to achieve. It's one-click mentality. That's another thought you have to go through. If we have to develop something, then deploy, and then go into the portal or into the AWS console and click 5, 10, 12, 15 buttons, that's going to be messy. It leads to that human error. People are going to be prone to make mistakes. It's not going to be beneficial for us because now it's harder to replicate something, right? Also, going off that next point, we should limit the sources of truth. If we have 5 different applications and we're going to deploy 5 different applications differently because we're doing it all manually, then from a support perspective, we're going to be supporting things 5 different ways. And that can be kind of cumbersome and kind of hard to unpack. So one thing I want to call out is automation is not easy. You will make mistakes repeatedly, and it's okay. So you can see in a nutshell, in this example, what I'll say is you have a process that's working. It works. MVP, we get it out the door. It's absolutely working. Okay, why would we want to change that? Well, maybe we need to look at how we got out the door and say, okay, how can we repeat this quicker? How can we repeat this for other products or projects? And we have to take a step back and literally break what we just did. We just got it working. Now we got to take a step back and break it and compartmentalize it in such a way that, all right, how can we go ahead and find the reusable components? How can we go ahead and take this and apply it in other places? Which that feels unnatural, right? We've got the celebration, everything's done. Now we're going to go in and redo it. But here's an example just from my experience. In the bottom right there, and I'm sure, sorry, it's probably tiny for you, but essentially it's a huge release, multiple stages, microservice architecture. And if you aren't familiar with that, microservices are going to be potentially different code for different endpoints using the same pattern for architecture. So the same type of platform, same type of logging, all those kind of things. Well, in this given scenario, everything was done manual. All this was set up through UI, and you can't see there's like 7 tasks for each one of those. Well, we got into it and said, okay, if I take one of these, what if we script out and do automation rather than any type of manual clicks? Well, when we break it down, find out, oh, there's 7 tasks. Okay, write it down in one line, one file, that's it. It works still. Okay, so now let's go to the next one. Hey, these tasks are the same, right? Let's go ahead and say, let's define one task, and both of these can share. And by the way, this is using YAML pipelines. I believe there was another session on that. So that helps you understand if you're more technical. But either way, once you now start pulling out and saying, okay, these tasks are the same, then you can roll up and say, hey, our deployments are the same job. We're just passing in different inputs. So now we go ahead and we take a level out of that. And eventually we get to the point where to deploy an entire platform, all we're doing, if you can't see it, is just passing in the environment name, dev. That's it. Even that's a variable defined in another file. So it's really now automated. Everything's contained. And the other point with doing that too is if you're using templates for automation, at any given point, we can break out individual ones of these and say, okay, I just want this one to go. Well, now it's a template. We can just deploy it, very little inputs. So you start getting to that reusability phase in automation. And automation is awesome, is all I'm going to say. Once you get there, and it is a process and it is a journey. All right, so next up we've got is the CI/CD. So CI/CD, if you aren't familiar with it, I'm going to take a step back there to describe for those that may not be technical or hear this term all the time, CI/CD. It's continuous integration and continuous deployment or delivery. And I'm going to step through and define each one of these just in case you're unaware, and we'll tie it back into DevOps. But CI is kind of referred to, I call it the constant stream of code. So with constant continuous integration, every time you make a code change and it works and we're satisfied with it, we're going to push it in. Not even the whole feature sometimes, just individual components. And that may feel a little awkward if you've been around doing development long enough where branching, merging, all that, it used to be a big ordeal, right? I mean, I remember when we would do features, you'd have to have a meeting for 30 minutes and go through my merge to make sure It's not going to interrupt anything anyone else is doing, and everyone's aware of what I'm doing. But with the way technology and project management and process have gotten to, we have the ability to make very minimal changes consistently. And as part of that, if you bake in quality control checks, which might be peer reviews, it might be static code analysis, it might be unit testing, it could be other things too. But it's those things that if we automate that from the previous point, right, then we become second nature. We don't have to worry about it. So with peer reviews, if we have it built into our life cycle and our process, I go ahead and I do a checkout, go ahead and commit it. And I'm sure there's been a couple topics on this or referenced it. Someone then reviews my code and says, this looks good. I'm going to go ahead and put your change in with the larger code base. Well, as part of that, you can automate and say, hey, that little change you're making, let's run it through some security static code and static code analysis, let's say, and see if you're actually doing things the right way, as well as unit testing. So every little change, if we can automate our unit testing, we can be ensured that it's going to pass testing. And I'm going to take a little detour there and say unit testing, make sure you're testing for good things that work and things that don't work. People always forget to test for failure. But the purpose of that is, and the practice is, let's say if I'm developing a feature and depending, let's say scope was kind of squirrely, we had 3-4 endpoints on that feature or 3-4 changes, and they're kind of really similar. Well, if I wait to check in all 3 or 4 and do this, now I've got 3 or 4 errors, rather than just if I did the first one, there's an error, go back and learn. Personal experience where this gets kind of weird is with when I first did CI/CD, I made a change, everything looked good on my end, asked someone to review it, commit it, guess what? And failed quality control. Oh man, go back, fix it, guess what? Failed quality control again. So personally, as a developer, and then it was like, all right, what is going on in integration checks that I can replicate on my machine? And I learned from it, right? It makes you a better developer, it makes you a better team member to understand what actually is going through integration controls. So benefits of some of that is you're able to roll back changes too, very minimalistically, because they're very small changes. It's a lot less risk rather than one big risk. We have lots of little risk, which are easier to mediate rather than, oh, we brought a whole system down. You can also ensure a higher standard of code because you're repetitively doing the same thing over and over and over, testing it. The next part of CI/CD is continuous deployment or delivery. And this is where, if you haven't done this before, it might feel a little awkward, but it's immediately deploying artifacts. Notice I didn't say code there because CI/CD can apply to things outside of code. It can be potentially data sets. I mean, there's other things it can apply to. And you deploy everything in my mind, your infrastructure and your code. There's probably some disagreement on that, and it's fair. But the reason I say that is that we can confidently say what we have checked in can be deployed anywhere at any given time, and it works. Rather than, yep, this code base works. Yeah, but the infrastructure needs to be deployed first. Well, if we're deploying everything together, we know everything from an integration standpoint is working. You can deploy with confidence. The benefits too is you get immediate feedback. If I try to deploy something and it fails, I know, as well as, let's say, the downstream and upstream processes. And don't get me wrong, I'm saying deploy to a lower environment first. But let's say there's upstream and downstream processes, and I deployed my change, it works fine, passed all the integration checks, all that kind of stuff. Bob's 3 projects over starts to fail because my change broke his. I didn't have visibility to it, but because I was continuously deploying code, I'm now aware of it rather than, okay, we're going to go ahead and cut to production. Cut to production, it's a nightmare. We're finding out all these things that we didn't think of, as well as it starts to build in an audit trail. By doing it this way, we're able to take individual change sets, tie them to what they deployed, and also the other way, if you're doing it, depending on how you're doing it, your individual commits are tied to individual work items, which are requests from your customer. So again, tying this back to that, to be able customers to continuously deliver value to our end users, that's what this kind of entails, because you're deploying value or trying to test deployment of value every single time. So how does this kind of help the mindset if it wasn't necessarily clear on some of that? Is doing the difficult things repetitively has a very good impact on you. If you do things difficult continuously, I think there's a saying like Netflix, I can't remember it, maybe someone out there knows it, but if you start doing the more difficult things repetitively, it becomes easier. And if they're the right things, now you've just made your job easier in essence. You can also start to stress test your system and processes out. So a good example in real world to bring it out back to folks is, a couple of years ago, I had some brake issues on a car. When I took it to a mechanic, it worked beforehand. It was just I don't think this is working right. They said, we're going to stress test it. Well, stress test the brake lines and it ruptured. Again, you stress test things, you find the cracks, you find what's not working well, and then you can adjust or replace if need be. I already mentioned about that clear audit trail. And there's also a collaborative opportunity here for folks. When I mentioned about we have that peer review, that means someone needs to be aware of the changes you're making before you commit to the larger project. You can bake that into the process, and that's just a screenshot there of the test cases I alluded to, trying to integrate test cases in. That specific one, if anyone's really interested, is the TTK library for ARM templates. And then the one below that's just showing how to do a approval on a PR request, that someone else was aware of it. Multiple people, actually, you can see everyone in the approvals was aware of it. You can see who approved it. That's also really good because it gets away too from that DevOps perspective is how many times have folks said, okay, it's 2 a.m., I'm just going to deploy the code. And you deploy the code and no one knew what you did until the next morning. Well, if it's baked in here, someone knows. So there's at least someone who can gut check you or be aware next morning if there's a fire drill. Next up, I alluded to it, there is collaboration. So, and I saw a presentation too talking about different teams and different collaboration aspects of it with the DevOps mentality. And there was a question on that too. You need to be a good collaborative environment. May that be with a project team, may that be with your own team, because what happens is you have to develop an all for one, one for all mentality. And there has to be a mutual respect. As a developer, I respect the role of what the security person does, what the tester does, what the project manager does, so that we can help each other because we're all in it together. If I am a security person saying, okay, I don't want to be the guy to throw the red flag, the challenge flag after the touchdown, right? I want to be involved in the process. So how can I work with developers and say, hey, we really need this, and I can help lower that barrier of entry potentially by facilitating it. May that be through some sort of automation, may it be through some sort of collaboration, but be part of the conversation. Developers too, if testing's taking 3-4 hours, let's look at trying to see how we can write unit tests. Let's see how we can make their lives easier. And you start to empower team members there. I'll go pick on security and say it's the other way too. If I'm a developer or an ops person and I can help you automate your infrastructure or your platform, then we can get the security folks focusing on the security things, because security changes regularly. Let's let them empower them to be working on what their specialty is and what we really trust them to do. So the concept becomes, as an entire team, we're going to move forward together. And that's a good concept there. You're going to take away from some of this and work on your own projects and be able to learn from one another, which we'll get to in a minute. But the scratching we're going to talk about, which is probably when you look at this list, the one thing going, what the heck does that mean? I'm going to say that the scratchy is that awkward feeling of doing something new, of doing this. If you're accustomed to some of the stuff I alluded to, then if you're not accustomed to some of the stuff I alluded to, it's going to feel kind of odd. It's going to feel kind of different, right? If I have to constantly be deploying my code, if I have to have someone watch everything I check in, that feels kind of weird at first, right? Feels like Big Brother might be watching you. Rest assured that that's not the case here. It's more so getting back to that learning, collaboration. It all comes together, and you have to have the self-awareness to be able to recognize, going, okay, in the long term, what's best for my customer and best for me as a person or an individual, potentially as a professional, is to do some of this. It makes me and my skills improve. Versus also, there's a self-awareness piece I throw out there going, there's a difference between scratchy and what I call cowboying. Cowboying is when you go out in the Wild Wild West, you build something really cool, really awesome, you don't tell anyone about it, and then it becomes one person is maintaining it, as well as two, in DevOps, in that mindset, there's opportunities where you have to ask yourself, by doing this or not doing this, is this right to the customer? If it's not right to the customer, you shouldn't be doing it. And it's a gut check, and it might feel awkward to be the one to raise the flag up and say, hey, we need to take a step back here. But I would much rather do that ahead of time rather than later, because if you don't, then the next time around, it's going to be taken as it's okay. The other point here is fail confidently. If you're not used to being in an environment where you fail all the time, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to succeed in DevOps. You need to be given space to fail and to learn. Now, granted, you have to be able to scope that, and that goes back to that less risk comment I made. If I have a huge risk and there's not a margin or ability to fail, then DevOps is going to be an issue. But if we start doing these small failures, you learn from, you get better, and you go on. And that'll be the next point here. And some of that too, you lead to a stretching feeling. And that's how you kind of learn. And that's the next topic here is learn. So how do you learn in DevOps? You start learning cross-domain. And by cross-domain, I kind of alluded to that if I'm going to empower and help the auditors, now I know what they're looking for. Now I know how to take that back and build it into my solutions or my applications. Didn't realize that before. Usually we just throw it over the fence and we'll figure it out. And I'll go back to that Agile and DevOps kind of help each other. Agile, if you follow the process, it's like, oh, okay, it goes to development, then it goes to the testers. It just goes whoop, over the wall, we're done. Well, in DevOps, if I know what they do and I respect them enough, I'm like, okay, let me make the job easier and make it cross-collaborative. And by doing so, it makes everything easier. So this also then leads to occasions for empowerment that I kind of was talking to. By giving folks these different opportunities to learn and being able to focus on what they're good at, there's being able to self-service. That's another big word you hear usually hand in hand with DevOps. And then also, I mentioned, again, can't stress it enough, being able to fail, because in learning, you're able to identify those failures, and then you're able to go back and learn from that. And that'll be the next point here. But you also start recognizing possibilities from those failures and saying, hey, you know what? Our automation steps really fell apart here. Or, hey, you know what? We got held up 3-4 hours because we had to call the on-call to deploy something. Well, let's have the conversation on, okay, how can we make that person's job easier so we don't have to wake up at 1 or 2 in the morning, and our job easier as in, okay, we're able to resolve problems quicker and faster. And then also you start learning by seeing the development of patterns, which is very key here in the process. So the one thing I will call out here for the development of patterns is traditionally when we're talking about architecture, we always architect the solution first. Or, well, of course, after requirements and that, but anyway, in this scope, we architect the solution first. Then we figure out how we're going to deploy it. Now, let's think the reverse. If we've got a well-defined development process or DevOps process, let's start architecting our solutions to fit a DevOps deployment and learning and this whole entire model. So then we start breaking down our architecture and finding out, okay, breaking down some of those walls, or in some cases, creating those walls, because go back, well, there's certain things as a developer that you shouldn't have access to from security. So now let's break apart that and say, okay, now that we've broken this apart, how is security going to manage this while empowering developers, and back and forth? And you start learning. It's kind of cool when you do this for a while, you get back to some of the stuff you used to do and say, hey, that was a lot cooler if we would have broken it out this way. It would save us a lot of headaches. So it's always good to go back and revisit what's out there. And the next part here is going to be repeat. Repeat is very key. Repeat's how we move ahead. It's how we get better at things. If we do things one time, it's harder to implement those lessons learned. So with that repeat process, I'm going to call out a book. I don't know if anyone's read it. It's called Peak. But essentially, you had some psychologists who committed themselves to study the best of the best of their practices. So this would be the savants, the people who are great at music, the people who are great at remembering numbers, the people who are great at chess, and all that. And the question was, and I'll get to why this goes to repeat here in a minute, but the question kind of was, are they naturally good at things, or how'd they get good at it? And apply this to development. What they discovered is that people, the best of the best, got there through countless purposeful practice, is what they call it, which is very repetitive. And also at times not very enjoyable, which is what people kind of assume, that if you're really good at something, you must love it all the time. Well, it turns out not everyone likes practice. Go figure, right? But what they brought back is some of these tidbits on what is purposeful practice and how you stretch yourself, which we kind of talked about with learning, and you got to keep doing it over and over. So that first point, right, putting a bunch of baby steps together to hit a long-term goal, that sounds to me like Agile and project management. Sounds like that to me for sure. Next up is feedback. We've talked about here how you get constant stops of feedback here through the CI process, the CD process, through learning, all of that. And that's a good call out. It actually reference each other, and I didn't know that. I did Peak first, and then I did Grit. Sorry, going off the comments there. And Grit actually references Peak, and Enders is in both of them, which is kind of interesting. So then there too, getting outside of your comfort zone, feeling uncomfortable, that's a big part of this. To be able to adapt and to get to that DevOps mindset mentality, you got to stretch. And then it's like I already talked about monitoring progress, and then maintain motivation. So this is kind of a fun one with DevOps. If you have an application, you think it's really good, you think you're doing everything DevOps related, all that kind of stuff, let's go ahead and take that and let's go ahead and deploy that to a brand new subscription or a brand new place in AWS. Completely agnostic, and let's see what happens. Well, guess what? We didn't count for geo redundancy potentially. That's one you can throw out there, right? Or we didn't account for these subscription agnostic things. That's some real tests that it'll maintain and motivate yourself. The hard part is getting time and space to fail and then say, hey, we need to go fix this, even though it's not directly impacting our customer. Okay, but it'll impact the next customer, the next project. Or if that region goes down or something, we've already tested what we're going to do and we're more confident. And the other part to this is it doesn't stop. To keep growing and to keep doing these things, we keep going this iterative cycle to learn, and it's different every time. I will tell you, you can plug in the different details. May that be doing something on the data side, may that be doing something on the development side, may that be doing something on the graphic design side. So that's why I didn't really talk about, but if you apply some of this to what graphic designers do, there's a lot of the same things, right? I go ahead and do something, I get feedback, we collaborate, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of cross-discipline things in DevOps. So let me go to the next slide here. I threw this slide out there for miscellaneous misnomers that I throw out there because I think there's sometimes some misconceptions on what DevOps truly is. I hate the term DevSecOps, to be honest, because if you're saying DevSecOps, that means you didn't think of security in DevOps. And that's probably an issue with how DevOps was implemented, or you didn't take that and say, okay, we learned, we missed it, let's go ahead and incorporate it. I think it's kind of a term to, and I could be, people can disagree with me on that one, but that's my opinion. The other one I don't like here is that you hear, we do Azure DevOps. Well, that's not DevOps, that's a tool. And it's great advertising on Microsoft. Personally, I think it's a little bit of a disservice because it also makes Googling 10 times harder on things. But again, great marketing ploy. And I have down there how DevOps is a great tool. Azure DevOps is a great tool for this kind of stuff. And I have that down there, what the different components are. And that's a graphic too. If you Google DevOps, you'll see a lot of, or a version of what that life cycle looks like. The other misnomer is people assume you have to be in the cloud to do DevOps. I don't think that's necessarily true. If you took everything I said here, you can translate that to on-prem for the most part. Being able to, essentially we're saying, okay, we need to be able to automate and script a lot of our things so that becomes second nature. That can be done on-prem. Now, cloud makes it a lot easier and can definitely help with a lot of this stuff, but it's not a completely exclusive, you have to be, or requirement to be in the cloud. The other thing that a lot of people say, well, DevOps equals development plus operations. No. You know, if you've been paying attention, I've mentioned at least 3, 4, 5 different hats, as I call them, or different roles, more than just development and operation. I think the reason why that kind of became is people view as in development's got the code done, we got to wait for operations to spin something up, and then that's the long tent in the pole, right? But no, there's many other stops there. There's many other things that we can do besides just saying it's development or operations. So in conclusion, and please, I kept the chat open here. If you throw something out there, I'll try taking some time here and we can talk through it. But in conclusion, hopefully you kind of see that for DevOps to succeed and to have a DevOps mentality, there's certain disciplines or self-disciplines that can be initiated, and those disciplines will grow between a team and an organization for it to truly succeed. And it's baby steps. It is absolutely baby steps. Start with doing CI/CD is very easy. So it can be very easy, the little baby steps. So, okay, I'm gonna make someone do a peer review before I check my code in. That's a baby step. Very, very easy to do. Okay, so I'll try touching on that here in the conclusion too. If you weren't watching, the question is kind of what what things can an individual contributor do to enable DevOps within their organization where it may not potentially be embraced. What I just said there with doing a peer review, absolutely. It's those little things that'll work, as well as personally, you're doing those CI/CD, as an individual contributor, I'm gonna do little changes constantly, blah, 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 blah. And then also I start noticing failures in my processes, or someone comes back for me every 6 months. Let's say the auditor comes in and says, hey, we need this information. Let me automate and script that. And let me also continuously give that to you when it changes. Challenging yourself in those kind of ways, I would say, is definitely a way. And then you'll get attention. You'll get the security auditor folks going, really? You can give me that on a minute's notice? Yeah, I can give that to you. Or, hey, can you let me know when certain things releases? I'm going to go ahead and build that in my process and automate it. Very easy. I don't have to stay up late at night. Or even better yet, if you have a product owner who says, I want this code deployed at X time and it's during business hours, you go ahead and say, here you go. Here's the link to go ahead and deploy it for me. It's easy. And once you get some of those tools and practices in place, as well as being ready to fail and make sure you scope your failures to small failures. Other things we kind of talked about here is collaboration. And collaboration is a big one too. That's going to be very key to kind of learn and grow on that one. How to process it? The question here is how to process and product documentation tie into DevOps. That's a good question, because I'm going to throw Agile as that counterpart too, where sometimes documentation gets lost, or you get people to say just enough documentation. You try to bake it in to the process, to be honest. So what I mean by that is, so README files are awesome. If you have that, make a README file for it and make that part of your source control. So now you can document your individual code repositories or your individual change sets, as well as if you are, depending upon how your project management's going, everything can be initiated and tied back to original request. And you can trace that all the way through from your code base commit all the way to the request, as well as certain things too for product documentation. It's going to be on the group, and as well as this gets to that collaboration and stretching it. Me personally, and I'm probably in the minority on this one, there's some product documentation that should be in a code base, which means the product owner or the developer need to work together to get that in there. That's my 2 cents on it. There's pros and cons to that. Other things I want to call out here in conclusion too is that scratchy feeling is absolutely a good feeling. If you feel like you're giving it's wrong, or you're ready to give up and you're getting frustrated, keep trying, try again, and it will get easier, I promise you. So that being said, oh, here we go. Yes, software development lifecycle. That's what I'm referring to. Sorry, I mentioned that here. If you joined late, I didn't type that back in. Again, thank you for everyone who joined. Again, I'll stick around here. We've got 10 minutes. Okay, nice. I'll have to check out that place. I'll stick around. Any questions, more than welcome to help. Just remember, it's a journey. It's a process. It's not going to happen overnight. Oh, one more thing is make sure you do the feedback that was sent out there. That's kind of how AIM really helps get speakers to come or ask to come back, as well as anything they can improve upon next year. Absolutely do that. As well as I will throw out there that, AIM's a nonprofit. If you can go ahead and put in your donation. I did that. Hopefully win the headset. That'd be very nice. If you go ahead and do that, it's a good motivating factor there.
Thanks, John, for doing that little plug for us.
Of course, whatever I can do to help.
You're coming and do it, and you stole my thunder.
I got time to fill, so I went a little faster than I thought I would.
Oh, no, that's good. And John has put his contact information up here too, so if a question comes to you later, feel free to reach out to him at any time. And like he said, please take a moment to fill out that session survey. It really helps us to make sure that we're giving you guys the best quality speakers that we can, and we can give the feedback back to the speakers so they can continue to improve what they're doing. And be sure to head over to the main stage here at 4 o'clock. We're going to be announcing our first raffle winner at 4 o'clock. Which is very exciting, and then stick around through 5 to to qualify and be ready to hear the second raffle winner, you must be present in order to get that prize. So if you leave now, you feel like you're going to get it, you can't get it if you leave. So head on over to the main Microsoft stage, and we'll be starting that all here really shortly. So again, thanks, John. Excellent presentation.
Thank you. And hey, if you learned anything, you fail and repeat and give feedback. That's what that survey's about, right?
Yeah. All right, I'm going to jump off here to head over to the main stage. So thank you guys for sticking around.
Well, if I'm here and no one's asking questions, wondering what was everyone's favorite talk? Yeah, that's definitely a no-no. Okay, I didn't go to that one. That's what I like about HDCs. You get a wide span of conversations or topics, right? You get technical, non-technical design. It's good spread. And thanks for the feedback too. Thanks for everyone for the feedback on that.